Did this old black woman really think she could cruise through our county without getting permission?
Deputy Roy Tanner sneered, slamming his heavy flashlight against the windshield, blinding Naomi instantly. His partner, Deputy Breslin, violently ripped open the passenger door, tossing her late mother's funeral clothes straight into the mud.
Look at this garbage. What are you doing out here, selling drugs or looking for trouble?
Breslin barked a cruel laugh, snatching a worn leather Bible from the seat and shaking it mockingly. Naomi sat frozen, her father's knuckles tight on the wheel, refusing to give them the angry reaction they wanted. Tanner hauled her out by the collar, slamming her body against the cold metal of the rental car.
A funeral? Don't make me laugh. People like you don't belong on Route 9 after midnight.
Midnight, Tanner hissed, violently kicking her ankles apart to search her.
Cry all you want, sweetheart. Out here nobody can hear you, and nobody is coming to save you.
They thought she was just another helpless, terrified target they could humiliate and erase in the dark. But as Tanner shoved her phone into his pocket, he had absolutely no idea the line was wide open. And Naomi was actually the newly confirmed Inspector General of the United States Department of Justice. A convoy of heavily armed federal marshals was already burning rubber down the highway, ready to completely destroy their corrupt kingdom. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. And make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you will not want to miss. To understand how two deputies ended up making the single worst mistake of their lives, you have to go back a few hours, to the quiet before all of it. Because the evening had started in silence. Naomi Whitfield had spent 3 days in her hometown of Caldwell Hollow, burying her mother, Ruth, and she had stayed one extra night to close up the little house on Persimmon Lane, where she'd grown up. She had washed the last dish her mother would ever leave in a sink. She had folded the quilts that still smelled of her mother's hands. And now, near 11 o'clock, she was driving the long way back toward the interstate and the airport, the radio off, her mother's Bible riding on the passenger seat with a pressed magnolia flower still flat inside the front cover. 51 years old. And she felt like a child again. That particular orphaned hush of being nobody's daughter for the very first time. She had grown up on these roads. That was the thing the two deputies would never have guessed. The woman they would soon decide was an outsider. Some government type from somewhere else. Had been baptized in the Mount Pisgah Baptist Church 4 miles up the county route. She had ridden the school bus down this very stretch of Route 9 every morning of her childhood. She had picked up shifts at the diner that used to stand where the dead gas station now stood. She knew the bones of this place. She knew which families had stayed and which had been pushed out. She knew which roads a black driver learned, without ever being told, to simply avoid after dark. She had spent her whole career 1,000 miles from here. But the fear that lived in her chest tonight had been planted in her on this exact road when she was 16 years old. The first time a flashlight had filled her father's face, and she had watched the strongest man she knew make himself small and quiet. And yes, sir, for a man half his age, she had never forgotten her father's hands on that wheel. 10 and 2. Knuckles pale. She had put her own hands there now. Tonight, without even deciding to, her mother had outlived that fear. In her own way, Ruth Whitfield had cleaned the big houses up on Cedar Ridge for 30 years. She had raised a daughter alone after the cancer took her husband. She had sat in the back pews, in the back kitchens, in the back of more buses than she could count. And somewhere in all of that, she had built something inside herself that the world could not get at. The Lord didn't make me small just because the world tried to, she used to say, threading a needle by the window light. And young Naomi had thought it was just a thing, church women said. It had taken her 40 years to understand that it was a strategy. It had taken her 40 years, and a badge, and an office in Washington with her name on the door, to finally understand that her mother had been teaching her the most important lesson of her life. One folded quilt at a time. That dignity is not something other people grant you, and so it is not something they can take. She passed the turnoff to Persimmon Lane. And she did not look. She did not trust herself to look. The little house was dark behind her now, emptied of the only person who had ever made it home. And Naomi Whitfield drove on into the night, with her jaw set, and her eyes dry, and her mother's Bible on the seat, carrying a grief so large and so private that she very nearly missed the headlights coming up fast behind her. She was doing 2 miles under the limit. She was certain of that, because she was a person who, by training and by temperament, was always certain of things like that. So when the headlights swung up fast behind her and the bar of lights ignited, she felt no guilt, only the old, familiar tightening in her chest that every black driver in America knows by heart. That involuntary inventory that runs whether you want it to or not. Are my hands visible? Is my registration current? Did I signal? Is there anything on the seat that a frightened man could call a weapon? She had run that inventory 100 times in her life. She had even taught classes to young federal employees about the legal architecture of the traffic stop. And none of that knowledge did anything at all to slow her heartbeat now. The body remembers what the mind has filed away. She signaled. She slowed. She pulled fully onto the gravel shoulder. She switched on her dome light so the inside of the car was visible. She placed both hands at 10 and 2, her father's hands. And she waited. She watched the side mirror. 2 trucks. Not one. They had not simply pulled her over. They had angled both vehicles across the road behind her, blocking the lane, as though she might bolt, as though a 51-year-old woman in a cardigan on her way home from a funeral were a flight risk. That detail told her something before either man said a word. This was not a man checking a taillight. This was 2 men who had decided, the moment they saw who was driving, that tonight they were going to have some fun, and then it happened the way you already heard it happen. The flashlight against the glass, the funeral clothes in the mud, the Bible shaken in a stranger's fist, the hands on her collar, the body against cold metal, the boot kicking her ankles apart. Cry all you want. Sweetheart, out here, nobody can hear you, and nobody is coming to save you. You people? The phrase landed in the dark like a stone dropped down a well, and Naomi let it fall, all the way to the bottom of her, and disappear, because she had spent 30 years of her career building the muscle that let her do exactly that. Absorb the insult without letting it pull the trigger of the rage they were so plainly trying to find. She had learned, long ago, that men like Tanner were not really looking for compliance. Compliance bored them. What they were hunting for, on a dark road with no witnesses, was a reaction, a raised voice, a yerket arm, a single sentence with heat in it, anything they could later write down as resisting, anything that would let the story they told about her become the only story that survived. The trap was not the handcuffs. The trap was the temper they were trying to provoke. And Naomi Whitfield had not let anyone provoke her temper since she was 19 years old. So she gave them nothing. She breathed. She catalogued. Tenor. Badge 417. Breslin. Badge 503. 11:09 on the dashboard clock before they pulled her out. 2 trucks, both dash cams running, or supposedly running. She let the cold metal of her own rental car under her palms anchor her, and she narrated her own compliance in a clear, carrying voice. Not for the deputies. For the recording she did not yet know was already running. What Deputy Roy Tanner did not know, what neither of them knew, was that 9 days earlier, in a wood-paneled chamber on Capitol Hill, the woman whose ankles he had just kicked apart had raised her right hand and been sworn in as the Inspector General for Civil Rights Oversight at the United States Department of Justice. Her office had subpoena power. Her office could open federal investigations into police departments anywhere in the country. Her signature could end careers, freeze pensions, and put men in federal prison. And by sheer, knife-edge coincidence, the county they were standing in, Caldwell County, was already a name in a folder on her desk, flagged 3 months earlier for an unusual number of unresolved complaints from black motorists on this exact stretch of Route 9. She had not come here for that. She had come to bury her mother. But the road had brought the case to her. When Breslin had picked up that worn leather Bible and shaken it, hard, as if a felony might fall out from between the pages. The pressed magnolia flower her mother had carried inside that cover for 40 years. The flower from her own wedding day. The one thing Ruth Whitfield had kept through every hard year of her life. Drifted out and landed in the gravel. And Breslin stepped on it without noticing, grinding it under his boot heel as he turned. And the small, dry sound of it was the only thing on that whole loud road that Naomi heard. She watched the flower crush under his boot. And she said nothing. And that silence cost her more than anything the men had said or done. Because there are insults a person can let fall down the well and forget. And there are smaller things. A flower. A folded quilt. A mother's name in a stranger's careless mouth. That lodged somewhere deeper and stay. Naomi felt the heat rise in her throat. She felt, for one single second, the full pull of the trap they had set, the almost overwhelming human desire to scream. That was my mother's. You have no idea what you just did. And she swallowed it whole, because she knew that her grief was exactly the lever they were hoping to find, and she would not hand it to them. Not that. Not ever that. You don't have probable cause to search this vehicle, she said quietly, her voice perfectly steady, betraying nothing. I do not consent to this search. I'm stating that clearly, and I'd like it noted. Noted, Breslin said, and he laughed, and he kept searching. A pair of headlights crested the distant rise and slowed as they approached. A battered pickup truck. An old man behind the wheel, his face pale in the dashboard glow. He slowed almost to a stop, taking in the scene. 2 deputies. A woman bent over a car with her hands behind her. Lights everywhere. A body language on that road that any person who had lived long enough could read instantly and correctly. Naomi turned her head and looked straight at him. She did not call out. She did not have to. She simply held his eyes through 2 panes of glass and the strobing dark, one human being asking another, without a single word, please, see this. Remember this. For 1 second. One held. Electric second. The old man saw her, and something in his lined face flickered. Some old debt, some old fear, some war between the two. And then Breslin swung his flashlight up and aimed it directly into the old man's eyes, blinding him, and barked, "Keep it moving, nothing to see here," and the pickup's engine revved. And it rolled on past into the dark. its taillights shrinking to 2 red points, and then to nothing. And the witness was gone, swallowed by the same blackness the deputies had been counting on all along. Naomi watched the taillights disappear. And she understood then, with total and final clarity, the architecture of the thing. This was a place built so that no one would ever see. A dark road, chosen on purpose. A late hour, chosen on purpose. No cameras but their own, which they controlled, and could lose. No witnesses who couldn't be frightened off with a flashlight and a bark. This was not a mistake. This was not two bad apples having a bad night. This was a machine, engineered down to the choice of mile marker. And she had spent 30 years of her life taking machines exactly like it apart. And she knew the one thing every such machine cannot survive: light. The only way to break a system that runs on darkness is to drag it, eventually, into so much light that it can never hide again. So she made herself a promise, standing in the gravel with a stranger's hand on the back of her neck, and her mother's flower crushed under his partner's boot. She was not going to react. She was not going to give them the excuse they were fishing for. She was going to remember everything. Badge 417. Badge 503. The dashboard clock. The 2 trucks blocking the lane. The exact words. The flower. The old man's frightened eyes. She was going to be the most patient, the most courteous, the most maddeningly calm woman in the entire history of Caldwell County tonight. And then, when the moment came, she was going to make one phone call, and she was going to turn on every light in the state. "Before you put me in that vehicle," Naomi said, turning her head just enough, "I'm legally permitted one phone call to arrange representation. I'm going to make it now. From right here. While we're standing on a public road, you can listen to every word." Tanner laughed. "You think your lawyer's going to drive out here at midnight? I'm not calling a lawyer," Naomi said. She reached, slow and announced, into her cardigan pocket, and drew out her phone. Breslin tensed. Tanner's hand drifted toward his holster on reflex, but she only held it up, screen out, so they could see it was a phone and nothing else. Then she turned it face in and pressed a single saved contact at the top of her list. A contact saved under one word. It rang once. A man's voice answered, calm and wide awake, despite the hour. The voice of someone accustomed to phones ringing in the dark. "This is Cole. It's Naomi," she said, and her voice did not shake. "I'm on Route 9, just east of Caldwell Hollow. Mile marker 41. I'm being detained without a stated charge by 2 Caldwell County deputies. There's been a warrantless search of my vehicle and physical contact during my compliance. Badge numbers 417 and 503. I'm activating field protocol. I need a marshal escort. And I need the Caldwell County file pulled. The one already open on my desk." She paused, and her voice dropped half a register, hard as a closing door. "And Cole, record this line. Starting now. Don't stop until I tell you." A 2-second silence on the other end. The silence of a professional absorbing every word and converting it instantly into action. Then, recording. "I have your location. Don't say another word you don't have to. Mom, don't sign anything. Don't answer their questions. We are already moving. Pause. I've got you. I've got you." 3 words. They went through Naomi like warm water through cold hands. And for 1 second, only one, the iron in her wavered, because she had been so alone on this road, So alone in that house on Persimmon Lane. So alone in the world, since the morning her mother stopped breathing, and now a voice in the dark had said, "I've got you," and meant it. With the full weight of the United States government behind it, the deputies were still laughing. They had heard I'm calling for help 100 times from 100 frightened people on this road. And help had never once come. Because the whole point of a road like this was that help never came. That was the design. That was the genius of it. Tanner reached out and plucked the phone from her hand. Mid-sentence. But Cole had already heard everything. And the line, unbeknownst to either deputy, was still open. Tanner shoved the phone into his own shirt pocket without ending the call. And from that moment on, every word spoken anywhere near Roy Tanner traveled quietly down an open line into a recording running on a federal server 2 states away. He had taken her phone to silence her. He had instead made himself a wire. Real impressive, Tanner said, hauling her wrists behind her back and ratcheting the cuffs 1 click tighter than he needed to. The way a small man does when he wants you to know he can. Let's go. Inspector. He meant it as a joke. He had no idea he had just said her actual title. They put her in the back of the patrol truck. Behind the cage, on the hard plastic seat that is designed to be uncomfortable, Naomi sat very straight, her cuffed hands aching behind her. Her mother's Bible left behind on the gravel shoulder of Route 9, where Breslin had dropped it, and she watched the dark field slide past the cage window. And she counted the minutes, 11 of them. She counted the turns. Four. She counted the exact number of times the 2 men in the front seat laughed about her, made jokes about D, C, and about her dead mother, and about what they imagined her husband or her lawyer would or wouldn't do. Because every one of those laughs was going to be a sworn line in a federal affidavit. And Naomi Whitfield had a very, very good memory. And she was using all of it. She was not afraid. She kept waiting to be afraid. And she simply wasn't. And somewhere around the 3rd turn, she understood why. Because for the first time since they'd lowered her mother into the ground, she had something to do. Grief had been holding her under. Now the work had a hold of her instead. And the work was a thing she knew how to do better than almost anyone alive. The substation was a low brick building with a flag out front and a fluorescent buzz inside that made everyone look slightly dead. They walked her past a booking desk where a heavy-set sergeant named Del Pruitt looked up, took in the sight of a black woman in a cardigan with her hands cuffed behind her, and went back to his crossword without a word, without a question, without a second glance, without the smallest flicker of curiosity about why 2 deputies had brought in a 51-year-old woman with no charge written on any form. That incuriosity was its own confession. Pruitt had seen this exact thing too many times for it to register as anything at all. A woman in handcuffs and no paperwork was just a Tuesday. Naomi looked at him filling in 7 down with his blunt pencil. And she understood that his boredom was a crime scene of its own, that a man becomes part of a machine, not by pulling the trigger, but by learning to look back down at his crossword, year after year. While it runs, they put her in a holding room. Number 4. She noted. Wall clock, reading 11:52. And Tanner cuffed one of her wrists to a cold steel ring, bolted to a steel table, then left without another word and shut the door. The fluorescent tube overhead buzzed and ticked. Somewhere down the hall, a radio crackled. Naomi sat alone in the buzzing quiet with one wrist chained to a table, and she did the thing she had trained herself over 30 years to do in rooms exactly like this. She made the room work for her, instead of against her. She read the room number off the door. She read the time off the clock. She noted the camera in the corner. A real one. A lens. Its little light dark. Switched off. Of course switched off. She memorized the layout. The exits. The placement of the booking desk. The location of what had to be the server room. Based on the conduit running along the ceiling, she was not a prisoner gathering her courage. She was a federal investigator conducting a site survey, and the men who had chained her here had no idea they had just locked the inspector general inside the very building she would shortly take apart. "Sit tight," Tanner had said on his way out. "Captain will want to talk to you when he gets in. He likes to handle the mouthy ones personally." The captain? Of course there was a captain. There was always a captain. The man who set the temperature of a whole department. Who taught the young ones like Breslin that you people was a thing you could say out loud. Who had run this stretch of Route 9 like a private toll road for years. And never paid $1 of the toll himself. You do not get a Tanner and a Breslin by accident. You get them the way you get any crop. Someone tills the ground. Someone plants. Someone waters. Year after year. And calls it tradition. Across the county, things had already begun to move that the men in this building could not see. When Naomi had said the word coal into her phone on the side of Route 9, she had not called a lawyer. She had not called a husband. There was no husband. There had been onze, but Daniel had died of a heart attack at 46. 6 years ago, and she had buried him too. And she had learned the particular strength of a woman who has run out of people to lean on and has had to become the thing she leans on instead. She had not called a friend. She had called Deputy Director Marcus Cole of the United States Marshals Service, the field operations chief whose job, among many other things, was the physical protection of senior federal officials, and whose direct line every inspector general in the Department of Justice carried in their phone, for exactly the kind of moment Naomi Whitfield was now living through. She had hoped, when they handed her that card at her swearing-in 9 days ago, that she would never have a reason to press it. She had pressed it on a dark road outside the town where she was born. Cole had been awake at his kitchen table in the regional field office, 90 miles away, unable to sleep, when his phone lit up with her name. The instant she said the words, "feel," a sequence of procedures that had been written and rehearsed many times, and used almost never, snapped into motion all at once. The way a fire alarm does not stop to debate whether there is really a fire, within 4 minutes, Cole had the open Caldwell County file on his screen. The very file Naomi's own office had flagged 3 months earlier. 22 complaints in 3 years. Night stops on Route 9. Warrantless searches. Black motorists ordered out of their cars. Dashcam footage that went mysteriously missing whenever anyone formally requested it. 0 disciplinary actions. And every one of those complaints, when you followed the thread up, routed to a single name at the top of the patrol division. Captain Earl Doggett, 26-year veteran. A man with a spotless official record and a reputation among the people who lived on the wrong end of Route 9. As the closest thing Caldwell County had to a king, within 6 minutes, Cole had a federal magistrate judge on the phone, woken at home, briefed in 90 seconds, and signing an emergency order authorizing federal intervention to secure the safety of a senior Department of Justice official being held in county custody. Within 9 minutes, 6 black government SUVs were pulling out of a staging lot in tight formation, carrying 12 deputy United States Marshals in tactical jackets, and 2 attorneys from the department's Civil Rights Division, who had been pulled out of bed and briefed on speakerphone in the back seat as the convoy hit the highway, and in a 7th vehicle, half a length behind, rode Special Agent Dana Reyes of the FBI's Public Corruption Field Office, who had been trying, for 11 months, to find one clean, unimpeachable, undeniable reason to open a federal investigation into the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department, and who had just had that reason handed to her at 1 o'clock in the morning, by the single worst decision 2 deputies could possibly have made, stopping the wrong woman. On the right road. Tell me again who they pulled over, Reyes said into her radio as the convoy ate the dark miles. The Inspector General for Civil Rights Oversight. Cole's voice came back. D. O. J. Confirmed 9 days ago. There was a pause on the line. Then Reyes said, very quietly, almost to herself, they reached into the one fire in the whole country they should never have touched, and they grabbed the person who runs the fire department. Another pause. How far out are we? 11 minutes. Make it 9. And the whole time, through every mile of that convoy, through every minute, Naomi sat chained to the steel table in holding room 4. A phone that Deputy Roy Tanner had forgotten was in his own shirt pocket, kept an open line, and every word spoken in that buzzing brick building traveled quietly down it, and was written, in real time, onto a federal server, 2 states away. The men who had built their kingdom on the certainty that nothing said on a dark road would ever be heard were, at that very moment, being recorded by their own arrogance. Captain Earl Doggett arrived at 12:40 in the morning, smelling of coffee and cold air. In a pressed uniform with his name on a brass bar, he was a big man, with a politician's handshake and a bully's eyes, and he had run Caldwell County's roads for so long that he had genuinely forgotten there was any power in the world larger than his own. Tanner met him in the hall and briefed him in a low voice. And Naomi, through the cracked door of holding room 4. I heard the captain laugh, a mouthy one from D. C. Huh, government-type Doggett's voice was warm and amused. Let me guess. Wants a lawyer. Knows her rights. He said the word rights, the way Breslin had said the word Washington. I love these. They come down here with their little lectures. Let's go remind her where she is. He pushed open the door, and he filled it. He looked at Naomi, chained to the table. The gray cardigan, the tired eyes, the flat shoes. And he smiled the smile of a man who has correctly sized up the room 1,000 times. And never once been wrong. Ma'am, he said, lowering himself into the chair across from her, with a sigh of comfortable authority, the chair creaking under him. Sounds like you've had a rough night. Sounds like you maybe gave my deputies a hard time out on Route 9. He laced his thick fingers together on the steel table, just shy of where her chained wrist lay. Now I'm a reasonable man. Ask anybody in this county. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to calm down. You're going to answer some questions. Nice and polite. And maybe, you walk out of here with just a warning and a long memory about how we do things down here. Or, he let the words sit, or you keep up the lawyer talk, the I know my rights talk, and I write you up for obstruction and failure to comply, and you spend the whole weekend as a guest of Caldwell County, because the courthouse don't open till Monday, and judges like their weekends. By then, nobody's going to remember exactly what happened on Route 9, except my 2 deputies, and their reports. You understand what I'm telling you. It was, Naomi thought, an almost perfect distillation of everything she had spent her career fighting, delivered slowly, warmly, with the patient confidence of a man who had said versions of it many times and watched them work every single time. The threat was not the jail. The threat was the erasure. By Monday, nobody's going to remember exactly what happened. That was the real weapon. Not the cuffs. Not the cell. The certainty that his word and his deputy's reports would be the only version of the night that survived to reach a judge, and that hers would simply evaporate, the way every version before hers had evaporated, into the great dark silence of Route 9. Naomi looked at him for a long, long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean in across the table to hear her. Captain Doggett, I'm going to give you one piece of advice, and I'm going to give it to you as a courtesy. Not because you've earned a courtesy tonight, but because my mother, who I buried 2 days ago, raised me to give every person one fair chance, even the ones who don't deserve it. She held his eyes, without blinking. Right now, before anyone else gets here, you should take these cuffs off me. You should return my property, including my mother's Bible, which your deputy left in the gravel on Route 9, and you should let me walk out that door. That is the version of tonight where the fewest lives get destroyed. If I were sitting where you're sitting, knowing what I know, I would take that version. I would take it right now, without another word. Doggett laughed out loud, delighted. The laugh of a man who has just been handed an even better evening than he'd hoped for, or what he spread his thick hands at the buzzing little room. His fluorescent kingdom, the flag, the booking desk, the chained woman, or what? Exactly. You gonna call your husband, your congressman, your lawyer? He leaned back, the chair groaning. Lady, let me explain something to you. Slow, because you came a long way to not understand it. Out here, I am the law. I'm the first call, the last call, and every call in between. The sheriff golfs with my brother. The judge eats Sunday dinner at my table. There is nobody. Nobody. You can pick up a phone and call at 1 o'clock in the morning who is bigger than me. In Caldwell County. You understand now. You're not in Washington. Sweetheart, you're in my house. That, Naomi said softly, is the one thing you have wrong. She did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward. She simply said it, quietly, the way you'd tell a man the brakes on his truck had been cut. Not a threat. Just a fact he was about to learn at speed. And outside, far down the dark county road, 6 pairs of headlights appeared at once, over the rise, moving fast, moving together, throwing long beams across the empty fields. Sergeant Del Pruitt saw them first. Through the front glass. A convoi. Tight formation. Moving with intent. Government plates catching the light. The unmistakable bearing of vehicles that do not slow down for county lines or county kings. His pencil stopped. He stood up so fast his chair shot backward, and his crossword slid off the desk and fanned across the floor. Captain, he called, and his voice cracked on the word. Captain, you better come out here and see this. Dogjet, still smiling, still seated, called back over his shoulder without taking his eyes off Naomi. See what? Del, you see a ghost. I see 6 federal vehicles pulling into our lot. Pruitt said, Sir. The smile on Earl Doggett's face did not vanish all at once. It died in stages. The way the light dies on a long evening. First the certainty, then the amusement, then everything else. As he turned, slowly, toward the front of the building, and the wash of headlights now flooding through the glass, and laying his own enormous shadow across the wall behind Naomi, The 6 SUVs pulled into the lot in a precise, practiced arc and stopped as one, and the doors opened, and 12 Deputy United States Marshals stepped out into the harsh sodium light. In dark tactical jackets, with 3 gold letters blazing across the back, moving with the unhurried, total certainty of people who have never once in their professional lives had to wonder whether they would be obeyed. Behind them came the 2 attorneys from the Civil Rights Division, briefcases in hand, and ahead of all of them, walking straight and fast for the front door, with a federal credential already open and held high in his right hand, came Deputy Director Marcus Cole of the United States Marshals Service, the man whose voice had said, 11 minutes and 90 miles ago, "I've got you." He did not knock. The door banged open, and the cold night air came in with him. And Cole crossed the buzzing little room in 5 long strides, his eyes sweeping the booking desk, the frozen sergeant, the 2 pale deputies, until they found the open door of holding room 4, and the woman chained to the steel table inside it. Something in his face changed when he saw the cuff on her wrist. Not fear, but a deep, controlled, cold fury, held on a very tight leash, the fury of a man who protects the people who keep the country honest, and has just found one of them chained to a table by the very kind of men she'd spent her life holding to account. "Mom," he said to Naomi, and he did not lower his voice. He raised it, so that it rang off the cinder-block walls and reached every single person in that building. "Inspector General Whitfield, I apologize for the response time. We had 90 miles to cover." The words landed like a struck bell, and the sound of them rolled out into the silence, and kept rolling. "Inspector General." For 1 full second, nobody moved. Then the room came apart. Deputy Roy Tanner's face drained to the color of paper, and his hand drifted, uselessly, toward the phone still in his shirt pocket. The phone, the open line, the recording, as if some animal part of him had finally understood what it meant. Deputy Caleb Breslin actually took a step backward and bumped into a filing cabinet hard enough to rattle it. Sergeant Del Pruitt sat down very slowly, as though his legs had simply quit, and Captain Earl Doggett, who 30 seconds earlier had been leaning back in a groaning chair, calling her sweetheart, telling her there was nobody she could call, turned, very slowly, away from Naomi, and toward the federal officer filling his doorway, and watched the last of his certainty drain out of him, and pool somewhere on the floor. "Inspector General of what?" Doggett said. It came out cracked. It was not really a question. It was a man in the dark, both hands out, reaching for a railing that was no longer there. Cole answered him anyway, fully, formally, and at volume, because he wanted it on the recording, because he wanted every soul in that building to hear every word of it. Naomi Whitfield is the Inspector General for Civil Rights Oversight at the United States Department of Justice. She was sworn in 9 days ago. Her office has federal jurisdiction over every single law enforcement agency in this country that accepts $1 of federal funding, which, Captain Doggett, includes the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department, includes you, includes every man wearing a badge in this room. He let it hang in the buzzing air. "Tonight, 2 of your deputies stopped this woman on Route 9 without cause. They ordered her out of her car. They searched her vehicle without consent. And without a warrant, they put their hands on her while she was complying. They used racial language that is, right now, part of a federal recording. They detained her on charges that do not exist. And then you, the captain of this division, walked into that room and threatened a senior official of the United States Department of Justice with a weekend in your jail. So that, in your own words, nobody would remember what happened. Cole's jaw flexed. We're going to remember. Captain, all of it. Now, take the cuff off her wrist. Do it yourself. Doggett did not move. He could not seem to move. So Cole looked at Tanner, and Tanner fumbled the keyring out of his belt with shaking hands, and dropped it twice on the concrete floor before he got the little steel cuff open. It fell away from Naomi's wrist with a small, clean click, and Naomi Whitfield stood up. She stood slowly, deliberately, rubbing the raw red ring the steel had pressed into her skin. And she rose to her full height in the center of that buzzing room. And the strangest thing happened. The thing the deputies would turn over in their minds for the rest of their lives. The same plain gray cardigan that had read as nobody on the side of a dark road now seemed to read as something else entirely. Not because she had changed her clothes, or her posture, or her voice, but because every person in that room now knew what had been inside it the whole time. Standing on the gravel, sitting chained to the table, absorbing every insult without a flicker. The power had been there all along. They simply hadn't been able to see it. Because they had decided, the moment they saw her face, that there was nothing there to see. That had always been their mistake. It was the oldest mistake there is. She did not gloat. That was the detail the deputies remembered most. And never understood. She did not shout, or curse them, or throw their own words back in their faces, or savor it. A lesser story would have given her a speech. Naomi gave them silence and competence instead, which was infinitely worse for them, because it told them she had never once considered them her equals in this room, that to her, they were not enemies to be defeated, but a problem to be processed. She turned away from the three ruined men, as though they had already been filed, and she faced Special Agent Dana Reyes, who had just come through the front door with FBI stenciled bright across her windbreaker. And she said, in the exact same, even voice she had used all night long, Agent Reyes, the Caldwell County file. We are not waiting 3 more months. We open it tonight, right now, and we start with the dash cam server in this building. Before anybody in this room remembers how to delete things, Reyes smiled. A thin, hard, deeply satisfied smile. Already done. Ma'am. 2 of my people walked straight to the server room. Nobody in this department touches a hard drive tonight. Or any night. Until we say so. What followed over the next 6 hours was not vengeance. Naomi Whitfield did not believe in vengeance. She had seen, over 30 years, exactly how little it built, and how much it cost. She believed in something colder, and far more permanent. The patient, methodical, devastating machinery of the law, applied without exception, and without mercy, to people who had built their entire lives on the certainty that it would never once be applied to them. And on that long night, in that low brick building, she switched the machinery on, and it did not stop. The dash cam server, the one that had lost so much footage from Route 9 over the years, the one whose missing files had killed 22 complaints in their cribs, turned out, the moment a federal preservation order was slapped across it, to have lost nothing at all. Nothing had ever truly been deleted. The footage had simply been dragged into an unindexed folder, buried 4 levels deep, hidden, rather than destroyed, because the men running this department had been so certain No one would ever come with the authority to look, that they hadn't even bothered to do the job properly. And so the FBI technicians pulled it all back into the light in a single night. Hundreds of hours of it. Stop after stop after stop. On the same dark mile of Route 9. Year after year. Black drivers ordered out of their cars. The same hands resting on the same holsters. The same warrantless searches. The same belongings dumped in the same gravel. The same crushed dignity, recorded in the department's own files, in the department's own cameras, by the department's own hand. The very surveillance the deputies had used as a tool of intimidation became, overnight, the single most complete archive of their crimes that any investigator could have dreamed of. They had filmed their own kingdom falling, every single night, for years, and filed it neatly away. And Sergeant Del Pruitt's bored indifference at the booking desk, the crossword, the not looking up, the just another Tuesday shrug, turned out to be its own kind of evidence. The signature, again and again, of the man who had processed every one of those vanished arrests and asked no questions and filed no concerns. The quiet machinery that let the loud machinery run, because there is no such thing as a small role in a system like that. The man who looks back down at his crossword is holding the whole thing up. By the time the sun came up over Caldwell County, it was over for all of them. Deputy Roy Tanner and Deputy Caleb Breslin were stripped of their badges and their service weapons on the spot. Read their rights by federal agents. In the same building where they'd brought Naomi in, and charged under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242, the deprivation of rights under color of law, the exact federal statute that Naomi Whitfield's own office existed to enforce. The irony of it was lost on no one in that building, least of all the two deputies, who had spent the night joking about a woman who turned out to hold the very law they were about to be crushed beneath, and Captain Earl Doggett, 26-year veteran, the man whose brother golfed with the sheriff, who ate Sunday dinner with the judge, the man who had run Route 9 like a private kingdom for over a decade, was arrested in his own substation, in front of his own deputies, his own service weapon and badge sealed into an evidence bag, and walked out the front door in handcuffs, past the very holding room where, hours earlier, he had leaned across a steel table and asked a chained woman, or what. He had finally gotten his answer. The morning sun rose over Caldwell County and found a parking lot full of federal SUVs, a strip of yellow tape across the substation door, and a flag still hanging out front over a department that no longer belonged to the men who had run it. Inside, federal technicians were still imaging hard drives. Outside, a county that had spent a decade learning to keep its eyes down was beginning, in twos and threes, to gather across the road and watch, because word travels fast in a small place. And the word that morning was almost too large to believe. They took Doggett. They put cuffs on Earl Doggett. In his own jail, Naomi walked out the front door a little after 7, into a cold, clean light that lay gold across the gravel. Someone, one of the marshals, she never learned which, had driven out to mile marker 41 in the dark, and recovered her mother's Bible from the gravel shoulder of Route 9 where Breslin had dropped it, and had brought it back, and set it gently on the booking desk for her. She picked it up, and held it against her chest with both hands. The pressed magnolia was crushed flat and broken inside the cover. 4 decades of her mother's life snapped in a careless second under a stranger's boot, and she knew, with total certainty, that she would never be able to make it whole again. And it was that, Not the cuffs. Not the words. Not the steel ring bolted to the table. That finally found the crack in her. She stood on the steps of the substation. The Inspector General of the United States, 51 years old, and nobody's daughter anymore. And for the length of 3 breaths, she let the tears come. Silently. And then she wiped them with the back of her hand. And she was finished. Because grief, she had learned, is not the opposite of strength. Grief is what strength is for. Her mother had cleaned the houses on Cedar Ridge for 30 years and come home every night with her dignity uncrushed, not because the world had been gentle with it, but because she had refused, every single day, to let the world be the one who decided what she was worth. Naomi stood in the morning light, and she understood that she had just done the same thing, on the same road, in the same county, a generation later, and that the only proper way to honor the broken flower in her hands was to make absolutely certain that fewer people would have to find that strength alone. In the dark, with no one to call, in the weeks that followed, the Caldwell County case became something far larger than 2 deputies and a captain, and that transformation was Naomi Whitfield's deliberate choice, the most important choice she made in the whole affair. She could have closed it as a personal matter. She could have let the 3 men be prosecuted, accepted the apologies and the settlement, and walked away clean and vindicated. A great many people would have called that justice. Naomi did not, because she understood something the men who designed Route 9 had understood too. That punishing 3 individuals changes nothing about the machine that produced them. Cut down a dogget, and the soil grows another. The only justice that lasts is the kind that changes the soil, so she did the harder thing. Her office opened a full federal pattern and practice action and drove it all the way to a court-supervised consent decree over the entire Caldwell County Sheriff's Department. A binding, enforceable, years-long reform plan, with a federal monitor and a judge standing behind it. The terms were not suggestions. Every patrol vehicle would carry body and dash cameras that could not be switched off, could not be paused, and whose footage could never again be lost. Because under the decree, missing footage would itself be treated as evidence of misconduct. A single, elegant rule that turned the department's oldest trick into a self-defeating one. Every motorist stopped in Caldwell County now had the right to be told, on the spot and on the record, the specific legal reason for their detention. An independent civilian review board, with real subpoena power, not the toothless ceremonial kind, was seated to hear complaints, and its members did not work for the sheriff, and could not be fired by him. And every single stop made on Route 9, and every road like it in the county, would now be logged in a public, searchable database. The driver's race, the stated reason, the duration, the outcome, the use of any force, all of it, posted where any resident, any reporter, any grandmother on a porch, I could pull it up and read it. The darkness that the entire system had been built upon was, in the most literal possible sense, switched off. The men who had spent a decade building their power on the certainty that no one would ever see were now required by federal court order to operate under floodlights. They had no way to reach the switch for, and Naomi did one more thing. Quietly, that never made the news, and never went into any press release. She found the old man in the pickup truck, the one Breslin had blinded with a flashlight, and barked back into the dark, the witness who had been frightened away at the very moment he might have stopped. It took her office 2 days to identify him, from the timestamp and the county road records. His name was Walter Hayes, 73 years old, a retired high school history teacher who had driven that stretch of Route 9 nearly every day for 40 years, who had taught 2 generations of Caldwell County's children, and who had seen more lights in his rearview mirror than he could possibly count, and had learned the hard and humiliating way, the same lesson every black driver on that road eventually learned: keep your eyes forward, keep your mouth shut, keep driving. And thank God it wasn't you this time. Naomi did not send an agent. She drove out to his small house herself, on a Sunday afternoon, and sat with him on his sagging front porch, with 2 glasses of sweet tea between them, and she asked him to tell her everything he had ever seen on Route 9, and been too afraid to report. At first, he wouldn't. 40 years of silence does not break easily. It has its own gravity. But she waited. The way she had waited on the gravel shoulder, the way she had waited chained to the steel table. And finally, the old man began to talk. And once he began, he could not stop. He talked for 3 hours. He told her about the nephew pulled over 4 times in 1 month, about the deacon from his church, made to lie face down in the road, in his Sunday suit, about the young mother whose car was torn apart on the shoulder while her children cried in the back seat, about the funerals he'd been late to, and the jobs people had lost, and the families that had finally just packed up and left the county rather than keep driving that road. 40 years of it, poured out on a porch, into the ears of the one person in the world with the power to do something about it. Every word went into the federal record, and when, at last, he was finished, drained, and trembling, and somehow lighter, Walter Hayes looked at the Inspector General of the United States, this woman sitting on his porch in the late gold light, who had, 2 weeks earlier, been bent over a car on Route 9, just like all the others. And his voice broke as he said the thing he had believed his entire life. All those years, he said, I told myself the same thing every single time I kept driving. I told myself there wasn't anybody you could call. That's how they keep you quiet. You know, they don't have to threaten you. They just have to make you believe there's nobody on the other end of the line. Naomi reached across the space between the 2 rocking chairs and put her hand over his, the way she had wanted someone to put a hand over hers. On that dark and lonely road, there wasn't anybody you could call, she said gently. For 40 years. You were right. There wasn't. She held his eyes. Not until there was. That's the part we're changing now. Mr. Hayes. That's the whole job. Making sure that the next person who comes over that rise and sees those lights knows, all the way down in their bones, that there is somebody on the other end of the line. She testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee 3 months later, in the same kind of wood-paneled chamber where she had been sworn in, under the same bright lights and the same rows of cameras. She did not make it about herself. She mentioned her own night on Route 9 exactly once. Briefly, almost in passing, I was detained on that road myself, which is how I came to understand it from the inside. And then she set her own story down and never picked it up again, because she had learned long ago that the most powerful witness is the one who does not need you to feel sorry for her. Instead, she laid the evidence out, flat and plain and devastating. The hundreds of hours of footage the department had hidden rather than destroyed. The 22 complaints that had died for lack of a witness who could not be erased. The dozens of people like Walter Hayes who had finally, after decades of silence, told the truth into the federal record. The genius of a road like Route 9. she told the senators, her voice never rising, is not the cruelty. The cruelty is ordinary. The genius is the design. Choose a dark road. Choose a late hour. Fear percent, frighten off the witnesses. Lose the footage. And then your word, and only your word, is the one that reaches the judge. Every part of that system has a single purpose. And that purpose is to guarantee that the truth has no way to travel. I am not here to ask you to make men kinder. I have given up on legislating the contents of a man's heart. I am here to ask you to make the truth able to travel, to make it impossible to choose the darkness, impossible to lose the footage, impossible to be the only word that survives the night. Take away the darkness, and you take away the kingdom. It is that simple, and it is that hard. When the hearing ended, reporters crowded her in the marble hallway, and they asked her the same question, over and over, in a dozen different forms. How did you stay so calm, with a deputy's hand on your neck, with your mother's flower crushed in the gravel, with a man telling you there was nobody you could call? How did you not break? She gave them the same answer every time. My mother cleaned other people's houses for 30 years. She would say, and people looked at her the way those deputies looked at me, like she was nobody, like there was nothing behind her. And she used to tell me the Lord didn't make her small just because the world tried to. I carried her Bible on that seat. I wasn't calm because I'm strong. I was calm because I was not alone. Even when it looked like I was, none of us is ever as alone as the people who want to hurt us need us to believe. A year later, Route 9 outside Caldwell Hollow looked exactly the same. The same dark fields rolled away on either side. The same dying gas station sign still flickered. Half a mile from mile marker 41. It was still a long, lonely, unlit stretch of county road, where, on a moonless night, a person could feel the old fear rise in their chest the moment headlights filled the mirror. The land had not changed. The dark had not changed. But something underneath it had. Every stop made on that road was now recorded on cameras that could not be switched off, and counted, and posted in a public database where any soul in the county could pull it up and read it. The numbers were watched now, every month, by an independent civilian review board that did not work for the sheriff and could not be silenced by him. The deputies who patrolled Route 9 now knew, every time they reached for the bar of lights, that someone they could not see and could not intimidate would be reading the record of what they did next. The kingdom was gone, and what stood in its place was something far less dramatic and far more durable. Accountability, wired into the bones of the place, humming along in the background, whether anyone was watching closely or not, and Walter Hayes had been asked to sit on that board. At 73 years old, the retired history teacher, who had kept his eyes forward and his mouth shut on that road for 40 years, had been asked to become one of the people who watched the watchers. And he had said yes. On the night they swore him in, the ceremony was held, at Naomi's quiet suggestion, in the same low-brick substation where she had once been chained by the wrist to a steel table. The holding rooms were used for storage now. The booking desk where Del Pruitt had filled in his crosswords stood empty, and in the main room, under the same buzzing fluorescent lights, Walter Hayes stood up to say a few words, and found that he could not, for a long moment, because his voice had failed him, and his eyes had filled, crying, in front of the whole room. For every single time he had kept driving, for every light in his mirror he had been too frightened to name out loud, for all the long years he had carried, like a stone in his chest, the belief that there was no one in the world you could ever call. He gathered himself. The room waited, and when he could speak, his voice was steady and clear, the voice of a man who had taught 2 generations of children and had one more lesson left to give. I spent my whole life, Walter Hayes said, thinking the law was something that happened to people like me. Something done to you, in the dark, on the side of a road, by men who'd already decided what you were before you ever opened your mouth. I never once, not in 73 years, thought it could be something that belonged to us. 2. Something we could pick up and use. Something that could come over that rise in 6 black trucks and stand between us and the men who hurt us. He looked slowly around the room, at the young faces and the old ones, at the people who had come out on a cold night to watch a black schoolteacher be sworn in to oversee the very department that had terrorized them for a decade. It can belong to us. I know that now, but only if we stop being too afraid to be the witness, because I'll tell you the truth I had to learn too late. The worst thing they ever did to us out on that road wasn't pulling us over. It wasn't the searches, or the words, or the hands. The worst thing they ever did was make us believe that nobody would ever see. That's the whole trick. That's the entire kingdom. Right there. And the day we stop believing it, the day we decide to see, and to say what we saw, is the day the kingdom falls. The room was silent for a moment, and then someone began to clap, and then everyone did, and the sound of it filled the low brick building where a woman had once sat chained to a table and refused to be afraid. Naomi Whitfield was not in the room that night. She had been invited, and she had wanted to come, but she was 1,400 miles away, in a wood-paneled office in Washington, with her name on the door, working late, as she nearly always did. There was a new folder open on her desk. A different county, a different dark road, a different captain, in a different state, who had run his own piece of America like a private kingdom for years, and had never once imagined there could be anything larger than himself. There always was a next folder. There always would be. The work did not end. It only moved down the road. But Naomi had stopped seeing that as a defeat. She saw it now the way her mother must have seen each morning's pile of other people's laundry. Not as proof that the work was futile, but as proof that the work was needed, and that she was the one who had been given the strength to do it. On the corner of her desk, where she could see it from her chair, sat her mother's worn leather Bible. The pressed magnolia was still inside the front cover, still crushed and broken, exactly as Breslin's boot had left it on the gravel shoulder of Route 9. She had never tried to repair it or replace it, because some things you keep broken on purpose. To remember, it sat there in the lamplight, the one object in the room that had been on the passenger seat of a rental car, on the worst night of her life, the night 2 men looked at a tired woman in a gray cardigan and decided, with absolute confidence, that she was nobody, and learned, the way the world eventually, and always, learns, that there is no such thing as nobody. There never was. There never will be. Every single person who has ever been made to feel small on a dark road is carrying something the people trying to crush them cannot see. And the whole long arc of justice, slow as it is, late as it always comes, bends, finally, on that one unbreakable truth. So here's the question I want to leave you with tonight. If you had been the old man in that pickup truck, if you had come over the rise and seen the lights, and the woman bent over her car on a dark and empty road, would you have kept driving or would you have stopped? Tell me honestly in the comments, because we have all, at some point, been on one side of that windshield? And have you ever been judged the second you were seen? Before you ever said a word, share your story below. Somebody reading it needs to know they are not the only one. If this story moved you, dome a favor. Hit that like button so it reaches the people who need to hear it. Subscribe so tomorrow's story finds its way to you. And remember what Naomi's mother knew all the way to the end. Nobody can make you small unless you let them. And none of us is ever as alone as they need us to believe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.